Hello and welcome to Milwaukee Crime Ties. I'm your host, James Charles, and together we'll walk through the past and into the present of Milwaukee's crime scene. From the early days of bootlegging to today's rise in motor vehicle thefts, join me as we explore Milwaukee's evolving and perennial criminal landscape. Our crime tour starts back a century ago when Milwaukee was a young city ripe with opportunity for its native populations and young immigrants who brought a wealth of skills and business savvy from the old world. In time, this nascent city reached its adolescence and the criminal underworld found its niche.
Milwaukee, today known for its breweries, festivals, and sports teams, was once a city where the streets were ruled by more than just politicians and businessmen. In the early 20th century, Milwaukee became a hotbed of organized crime, driven by prohibition, corruption, and the influence of notorious gangsters. The seeds of organized crime in Milwaukee were sown in the early 20th century, during a period of rapid urbanization and political disruption. While the city itself was still growing, fueled by waves of German, Irish, and Polish immigrants, it faced serious challenges: poverty, crime, and a lack of effective law enforcement. But the true explosion of criminal activity came in 1919 with the passing of the 18th Amendment, Prohibition. With alcohol illegal nationwide, a massive underground economy began to thrive. And Milwaukee, with its proximity to Chicago and wealth of German immigrants, became a central player in this illicit trade. At the heart of this criminal empire was bootlegging, the illegal manufacturing, distribution, and sale of alcohol. While the legal breweries like Pabst and Miller shut down their operations, underground breweries began churning out millions of barrels of beer for the black market. It wasn't just local criminals getting involved. Al Capone, one of the most infamous mob bosses in American history, had strong ties to Milwaukee. His organization, the Chicago Outfit, used the city as a major distribution hub for illegal alcohol. Milwaukee's crime syndicates were ruthless, using violence and intimidation to maintain their control over the city's illegal activities. This wasn't just petty crime, it was a well-organized, highly efficient network with deep ties to both local politics and law enforcement. Corruption was rampant, and many city officials, police officers, and judges were either paid off or intimidated into looking the other way. As the city's crime families grew more powerful, their control over local industries and labor unions became more pronounced. Labor racketeering was one of the most profitable activities for organized crime during this period. Unions, which were vital to Milwaukee's growing industrial sector, were infiltrated by crime syndicates who used violence and threats to control union leaders and force businesses to pay them protection money. The grip of organized crime in Milwaukee began to loosen in the 1930s, when Prohibition was finally repealed in 1933, and the illegal alcohol trade quickly collapsed.
The liquor industry has long been a part of our city's industry and culture, and true Milwaukeeans have always found a way to enjoy a drink, even when it was illegal. Helping us revisit that bygone time today is Dr. Stephen Hauser, a retired professor of history. Dr. Hauser, welcome to our discussion today.
It's nice to be with you.
Now, taking us back to the Prohibition era, especially in a town where producing alcoholic beverages is still a vital part of our economy, how did that affect Milwaukeeans, both in the industrial sense and regular folks at home?
Well, it was a blow to the old solar plexus. Milwaukee did not respond well to Prohibition. In fact, there was a certain subtle outrage about it. And I think Milwaukee would have been angrier had Prohibition really been enforced in Milwaukee. The enforcement was rather haphazard because many Milwaukeeans enjoyed a beer or enjoyed their alcoholic beverage of choice. And they learned pretty quickly to ignore some of the restraints placed upon them by the 18th Amendment. Matter of fact, there was an old line in Milwaukee that said, if you really want to know where to get a drink in Milwaukee, ask a cop.
And some of the most famous images of the Prohibition era were, the dry squads and J. Elliott Ness and the gangbusters. That wasn't the scene here in Milwaukee?
Well, it was to some extent. It was realized rather early on that the Milwaukee Police Department could not be counted upon to enforce the Prohibition laws. The Volstead Act, the 18th Amendment, this was not serious business. Many Milwaukeeans of German, of Irish, of Italian descent, they came from cultures in Europe where a beer or fine wine or a good shot of whiskey was a part of life. The Germans would call it Gemütlichkeit, hail fellow well met. That it was part of living and part of a healthy attitude toward life. Germans called bread beer in hard form. Beer was liquid bread. So they were of the opinion that this law was foolish, it was frivolous. So as a result of that, the agents of the National Prohibition Bureau were brought into Milwaukee to ride herd on both the police and the citizenry, because otherwise it would have been Katie bar the door. There was really no enforcement. So the feds came in and the federal enforcement was there, and you could indeed go to jail.
Okay. And when we think of that era, we think of Al Capone and Chicago and the mob. How much of a stronghold did the mafia have in Milwaukee with regard to liquor and transportation of alcohol during that period?
Well, Al Capone was sort of an adopted son of Wisconsin, whether Wisconsin likes it or not. He was an unofficial Badger. He had a number of friends up in the northern part of the state, and he owned a home in the town of Brookfield, right off of Blue Mound Road, near Brookfield Road. In fact, the home is still there today. And he had the lease drawn up in the names of a Polish immigrant couple. So his name would not be on the lease, but it was his home. And at the same time, he was a part owner of the Mound Kennel Club, which was a dog track located on Blue Mound Road, near where Brookfield Square is located today. That club operated until 1929. So he had some connections here. There was a very famous nightclub called Sam Pick's Club Madrid, just west of the Milwaukee County line at 126th and Blue Mound. And Al Capone was a fawned upon guest at that club on many occasions, ordering a big thick steak. There was gambling upstairs if he chose to do that. And people knew of this kind of thing. Gangsters were semi-celebrities, if you will. A nightclub owner might entertain Babe Ruth one night, and the next night he might interview, or rather entertain Al Capone. So these things were part of the fabric of Wisconsin. It was part of the ethos of the state in the 20s.
Right. It sounded like people from other states maybe came to Wisconsin to get drinks where they couldn't get them otherwise.
Oh, and some never left. Very famous case of Jack Zuda, who was killed up at Nemaben Lakes, which is right off the interstate today. No interstate back then, but it was a rather remote resort. He was there one night and was shot to death, presumably by henchmen of Al Capone, although we don't really know.
Right. And the temperance movement had its stronghold on the national front. What was the temperance movement and that movement like in Milwaukee as a whole?
There was always a strong temperance movement in Wisconsin. In fact, in 1851, only a few years after statehood in 1848, a referendum vote was placed before the voters of the state, and 27,000 Wisconsinites voted to ban alcohol in Wisconsin. 24,000 voted to keep it legal. The legislature thought the voters had lost their minds and ignored this. But 4 years later, they did eventually pass a law restricting alcohol, but the governor had the wisdom to veto the thing. So that never came to fruition. There was a Prohibition Party in Wisconsin. In fact, it was part of the National Prohibition Party. And as late as 1922, a candidate for governor on the Prohibition ticket by the name of Wells actually got about 22,000 votes from Wisconsinites angry over the fact that Prohibition was not being more stringently enforced in its early years in the Badger State than it was.
All right. Well, Dr. Hauser, we appreciate your time. Thanks for coming in and joining us today and adding value to our discussion.
It's been a lot of fun.
All right. As Milwaukee made its mark in the world from the many products manufactured here, it was a single news story that sullied our town's reputation across the globe and left many families hurting. Decades later, Milwaukee cannot separate itself from the infamy of one name.
Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the 1980s and 1990s was a city grappling with significant social and economic changes, many of which contributed to the rising crime rates. This period saw a dramatic increase in violent crime and major criminal cases that drew the nation's attention. During the 1980s, Milwaukee's homicide rate climbed steadily, peaking in the early 1990s with rates significantly higher than the national average for cities of its size. Contributing factors included economic decline, population shifts, and the spread of illegal drug activity. Property crime, theft, and drug-related offenses were also widespread. Milwaukee law enforcement worked to combat these issues, but systematic challenges and strained resources often made progress slow. In 1991 alone, the city reported more than 160 homicides, a clear reflection of the escalating violence. Community organizations played a key role in addressing crime, calling for more proactive policing and social programs to improve conditions in vulnerable neighborhoods. Efforts to curb violence saw gradual progress in the late 1990s, though the scars of this turbulent period remained. Amid this backdrop of rising crime, Milwaukee became the focus of national attention in 1991 with the arrest of Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer committed a series of murders, primarily targeting young men. His crimes were uncovered when Tracy Edwards, a potential victim, managed to escape and alert the police. What they discovered in Dahmer's apartment shocked the world. Dahmer was charged with 17 murders and later sentenced to life in prison without parole. The trial exposed systematic failures, particularly a 1991 incident in which police returned a young boy to Dahmer, despite the neighbors raising concerns. This tragic oversight became the focal point for demands for police accountability. While Milwaukee made its strides in addressing crime and systematic reform, the period of the 1980s and 1990s remains a pivotal chapter in the city's history, a time of challenges, reflection, and resilience.
As the adopted hometown of convicted serial murderer Jeffrey Dahmer was not one of Milwaukee's finest historical moments, and decades later, this macabre tale refuses to rest. In the studio with me now is award-winning author and former journalist Annie Schwartz, who covered the Jeffrey Dahmer case from beginning to end for the Milwaukee Journal newspaper. Anne was the first beat reporter on the scene of the Dahmer apartment in 1991, and she's the author of both Monster and The Man Who Could Not Kill Enough. Anne, welcome to our discussion today.
Thank you, James. I'm happy to be here.
Now, taking us back to that time, 1991, you're working as a younger beat reporter at the Milwaukee Journal newspaper.
Very young. Very young, and I was a reporter at the Milwaukee Journal before it was two papers.
Right.
And I was the crime reporter. I was the kid who went to the homicide scenes, I went to the shootings, I went to everything, and all of that was really to get that look behind the curtain that I think is what drives a lot of people to the journalism business in the first place.
Right. And what got that phone call? Was it relationships with detectives and cops in Milwaukee, or?
Absolutely. It was those relationships. It was cops love a good story, and they like to tell a good story. And one of the things that happened was I got a tip call from a source of mine on my landline phone, kids.
Right,
they pick it up, and there it is. And saying, Annie, you got to get out to 25th and Kilbourne. It looks like there's a guy who's been saving body parts in his house. Now, look, cops like to have a lot of fun with you, especially with a young female reporter who is the only, female on the beat. But there was something in his voice that told me, I think I should get out there and check this out. So I did. I drove out to 25th and Kilbourne, and it was unlike any crime scene I had ever seen. It was quiet. It was very, very early on. There were only a few police officers on the scene. I remember walking up to the door, talking to a couple of people who were standing outside the building, and they were incredulous. It's a really hot July night, but they're holding their bathrobes and very close to their faces. They're obviously shocked by something. And I spoke with one woman, Pamela Bass, who is Jeffrey Dahmer's neighbor, and she started to tell me that she said, they found a human head in the refrigerator. And I'm thinking, this can't be, because, Milwaukee it's the Midwest, right? That can't happen here. But that can't happen here is the thing that every community says when they have a serial murder or they have a school shooting or whatever they have. There really is still that it can't happen here. But this was so outrageous that people couldn't believe, nor could I, that this had actually happened here.
Right. And how far into the scene were you allowed to get into?
Well, it wasn't a matter of being allowed. I arrived at the scene very early. Detectives were just kind of starting to get there. They hadn't taped it all off yet, so I was able to get into the building and walked up to the floor of the apartment. Rolf Mueller, who was a police officer at the time, he was the one that had opened the refrigerator, and he was standing up against a wall. I can remember it so well, and in the hallway, and just had his hands over his face. And I would find out years later from his wife after he had passed that he never got over the trauma of that scene. I was able to just kind of peek my head in the door. I didn't walk into the apartment. But the reason that was allowed to happen is because what do you think these Milwaukee police officers are doing in the apartment? They're now discovering all of the trophies of Jeffrey Dahmer. So they are looking in a drawer and finding Polaroids that Jeffrey Dahmer had taken of his victims in various stages of dismemberment. They're not noticing Annie Schwartz standing in the door. So for people to say, how could you get that close? They were very focused on the fact that they were seeing something. Even the most grizzled, even the most veteran officers could not believe what they were looking at.
And here we are, a few decades later, and the story is still across the globe in news accounts and in, a recent Netflix documentary, other films and theatrical productions. Why do you think will the story not go away? Why does it keep coming to light every few years in a new medium?
Well, I originally wrote the book in 1992 after the trial and Jeffrey Dahmer went off to prison. 30 years later, I got a call from the publisher saying, there's renewed interest in this case. Let's have you do a new version of the book called Monster, and let's have you kind of do a new foreword and a new afterword, which is kind of a where are they now? And so, it was funny to me that people are still talking about the story. There are a lot of people, James, when I tell people that I'm going to come and talk to somebody about the Dahmer case, or I wrote this book, and they'll say, no, but that's only in Wisconsin.
Right.
It's really not anywhere else. Other places, people want to hear all about it. And they even want to get a little close when they say it's, oh, that's disgusting. Tell me more. What do you know about this? And I still have that happen. I do have to correct you. I wouldn't call Ryan Murphy's movie a documentary.
Okay.
What he did was he did a movie. And the movie does not match up with the facts of the case.
Right.
But he's allowed to do that because he made a movie. But it's important to me, it was important to me, it's still important to me that when we talk about a case that's as historical as this, that we stick with the facts that we knew at the time. And so I wrote the book back then, updated it a few years ago when before the Netflix movie came out, and it's still a subject of conversation. There's a whole new audience out there.
Right.
I mean, these are young people that weren't born when Jeffrey Dahmer happened. Right? So, I mean, they were like in the 4th grade on 9/11, maybe.
Right.
So they don't know.
Now, for as much as you've written about Jeffrey Dahmer, did you ever have the opportunity or at least make the request to meet him?
I did meet him. I was able to meet Jeffrey Dahmer. It was a not exciting experience. I mean, he was, the way that, I'll tell you this, that in the Netflix movie, Evan Peters, the actor that played Jeffrey Dahmer, played him so perfectly. He was completely nonplussed about everything. He didn't have facial expression, and he didn't have inflection in his voice. His answers, very quick, very pointed, 1 or 2 words. There was no, let's talk more about that. There was none of that. He was just simply vanilla. And that's the deal with serial killers. They are not someone you'd remember. They're not somebody you notice. They kind of blend in, which is why they go so long without getting caught.
Do you think there are other victims out there that were never discovered and still unsolved homicides that might be attributed to Jeffrey Dahmer?
I don't, but I think that people want that to be true. I remember a author wrote a book about whether or not the whole book was based on whether or not Jeffrey Dahmer killed Adam Walsh, the little boy that was killed down in Florida.
Yes.
And I even spoke with John Walsh, his father, and John Walsh said there's no evidence. But, one of the things we know about serial killers, and specifically about Jeffrey Dahmer, is that when he knew he was caught, he wanted to unburden himself from all of the murders. So he was calling two detectives, Pat Kennedy and Dennis Murphy, at all hours of the day and night to say, I remember another one. We would not know about some of these murders were it not for Jeffrey Dahmer. And he confessed to a murder in a death penalty state, Ohio.
Right.
So it's not like he was, concealing. He knew he was caught. He wanted to unburden himself. He just wanted to tell the stories, and he did. And the fact that he gave a confession is the way that we know that some of these people were victims at all.
Right. And as you're sitting there, the young journalist, and now the story's run its course, what led you to want to memorialize this forever in a book?
Way back then, so we're talking about 1991, you are a part-time crime beat reporter and waitress, because every good journalist is a waitress too, and someone comes to you after this story we were nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for the coverage, and I got a call from a publisher after one of my stories had run in the national media, ran in the New York Times on the front page, and that's when they asked me if I would be willing to write a book, but would I like to write it in the first person?
Right, and the books have been successful, and people are still hearing about the story through your eyes.
Absolutely, I didn't have to give the advance money back. That's always good.
Annie, I'll cut you off there. Unfortunately, we got to move on, but
Sure.
I appreciate you coming in today and adding value to our discussion.
I appreciate you having me, and it is important that we keep talking about the case.
Absolutely. As we end our tour today in modern-day Milwaukee, we'll hear about the continuation of property crime in our city, which last year saw more than 6,300 motor vehicle thefts and more than 500 carjackings. We'll also gain some knowledge about how to combat crime and how to grow as a community to prevent future generations from making the same mistakes.
Even with Milwaukee's rich history and strong sense of community, in recent years it has struggled with significant crime challenges. Over the past couple years, Milwaukee has seen fluctuating crime rates. Violent crimes, including homicides and shootings, peaked in 2022 with 214 homicides, the highest in the city's history. However, as of 2024, Milwaukee has reported a 38% decrease in homicides, with 134 recorded for the year. One of the most concerning issues has been the rise of car thefts, fueled by the so-called Kia Boys. These loosely organized groups exploit a security vulnerability in certain Kia and Hyundai models, making them easy to steal with simple tools. Videos of their reckless driving stunts have gone viral on social media, glorifying dangerous behavior. In 2021, Milwaukee saw over 10,000 vehicle thefts, many of them linked to this trend. The issue reached such prominence that Kia and Hyundai were forced to release software updates to address the flaw, but implementation has been slow, leaving countless vehicles still at risk. The impact of these thefts has gone beyond property loss. The reckless driving associated with these stolen vehicles has led to injuries, fatal crashes, and a heightened sense of fear among residents. Neighborhood and law enforcement have been working tirelessly to combat the problem. To address the issue, Milwaukee police have increased patrols in high theft areas and created specialized task forces to target repeat offenders. Community organizations are also stepping in with public awareness campaigns, urging residents to secure their vehicles and report suspicious activity. Beyond car thefts, Milwaukee has made strides in reducing violent crime through initiatives like the city's Violent Crime Plan. This plan focuses on addressing reckless driving, human trafficking, auto theft, and robberies through proactive policing and community engagement. Community programs play a critical role in combating crime. Initiatives like the Violence-Free Zone provide mentorship and job training for at-risk youth, helping to address the root causes of criminal behavior. These programs aim to give young people alternatives and a sense of purpose. Mayor Cavalier Johnson has emphasized the importance of blending enforcement with prevention. By investing in programs to address poverty, education, and mental health, the city is working toward long-term solutions to reduce crime. Neighborhood involvement remains a cornerstone of Milwaukee's crime prevention efforts. Residents are forming watch groups, organizing block parties, and fostering a stronger connection to create safer communities.
As our city has changed its social landscape and its populations over time, we have seen one consistency, which is crime. Historians and modern practitioners still take turns weighing in on its causes and what we can do to prevent it in our modern society. And journalists still like to tell us the stories of true crime. We leave our tour today with perhaps more questions than answers, and maybe even wanting to double check our locks at night before going to sleep. Our thanks to Dr. Stephen Hauser and Annie Schwartz for joining us today. This has been Milwaukee Crime Ties. I've been your host, James Charles. Thanks for joining us.